Now we'll be moving on to Blair, who joins us here in person. Thank you. Can Blair sit down? Yes.
Cool, lovely. I think it's just more intimate that way, you know? Like, you can stand up and listen to people talk about the internet. So I'm just going to do one thing. I'm going to ask the question, how in one case did capitalism ruin the internet? And a really big one that a lot of people know about, or at least know the name of, is Cambridge Analytica. And they had something to do with the 2016 US election as well. I went on the Wikipedia page a couple of days ago, last night, just to check to see if this whole Trump Cambridge Analytica link actually was, had any veracity to it. And it turns out that, a lot of the Cambridge Analytica technology was deployed. I don't know whether by Russia or any, was deployed during the US election. So it has particular influence on our political systems and society already. And it's already been a number of years now. It's been like almost 8 years since the 2016 election. The company went defunct in 2018 pretty quickly, but this sort of practice now, collecting enormous amounts of data, finding bizarre correlations between them, and then trying to sell things to people or use it to control people for the purpose of collecting profit, is now commonplace. We now just say the algorithm knows me really well, which to me is an incredibly scary statement. I've heard people very close to me over the years, some people I still know, even they just say, oh no, you just need to train the algorithm to give it what you want. And I'm like, you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. It's very frustrating. Yeah, so if I had to say in 25 words or less, how did capitalism ruin the internet with Cambridge Analytica, I'd put it like this. Capitalism grabs a hold of a technology and uses it for morally ambiguous ends for profit. And it's as Lizzie O'Shea had just said, a lot of these decisions are just business decisions. It's taking very simple technology, but computing it in a special way leads to insights. It actually does lead to insights. So my position on the neutrality of technology is actually quite neutral. I used to think that if you created something, there was something intrinsic about it that might be good or bad, or useful or not. But I think when it comes to talking about the goodness or badness of some technology, I think I would say it's 100% the intention and the purpose to which it's put towards. There's nothing intrinsically bad about a hammer or a car or a chair. It's either a good chair or a bad hammer, depending on the context in which it's placed. So I think, I actually wrote a manifesto on this called Thesis Zero. I call it Thesis Zero because in computing you index from zero. Zero is the first number, because every number in the register has a place. So if there's blank, that you treat that as position number 1, which is also known as zero. I know that seems a little bit confusing. I didn't want to get too much into jargon, but I also want to be quick about this because I want to have more discussion and get people to ask more questions. So that's Cambridge Analytica basically. This is how it works. Very simple statistics. Statistics are normally seen as like dots on a graph, or like lines that go like this, or you take tallies on a sheet. It's not necessarily very complex. The first thing you learn about statistics is how to collect a total. How many data points do you actually have in total, right? And then you start taking simple things like an average, a mode, a mean, these sorts of things that give you an overall idea of how the numbers are distributed amongst each other. There's also a different way of treating numbers, right? So you can have cardinal numbers, ordinal numbers. And it depends on the way that the numbers are positioned and the type of data that you're collecting. In this case, we're collecting likes. So the like button was invented by Facebook, actually. It's a very passive way of getting things viral. So let's say you have hundreds of thousands of people all clicking like very passively, just scrolling past something passively, they click like, all of a sudden it becomes a storm, right? Something goes viral on the internet. All people have done is move their thumb. Another point, it's ridiculous how this works. So when you collect a lot of data, so for instance, someone's name, possibly their ethnicity, depending on how they've filled out their Facebook forms, or their gender, their sexuality, all these things. Turns out that because you have such a large data set on Facebook, you have billions of users, right? They all they have to do is click one like on a Facebook page. You can then correlate the personal attributes, if you want to use it as that term, that's the only thing I can think of, against that like. So, for instance, they found out, this is true, and you can quote me on this, they were able to out people as, that people were closeted as homosexuals, but because they clicked like on Britney Spears, turns out that through computer analysis and data, that it's very reliable. There's a very high amount of correlation between a cisgendered man clicking this is back in the day as well. I'm not sure if this, as data has gone on, it's become more reflexive. Now that we know about this information, it's not necessarily true, but up until that point, you could detect homosexual men very reliably if they clicked like on Britney Spears on Facebook. And I know it's a little bit like Ricky Martin. Oh yeah, we kind of already knew, or whatever. Maybe it's a bit like that. I don't know. Forgive me if I'm being insensitive, but it turned out to be true, right? So now we're having incredible predictive power based on something passive you did with your thumb. You can see why I'm a Luddite, right? You can see like, okay, we set up this huge communication network system and we use it for this. It's almost like if, you know, the Vulcans did land here, they'd be like, maybe not live long and prosper, I don't know. So let's move on to the second part, behavioural economics. So what do you do when you have a reliable, crazily reliable source of data with a huge set amount, right? Well, you deploy it to make money. And what's the best way to do that? The best social science behind that is called behavioural economics. Behavioural economics interrogates the person like this. You're a computer, you have inputs and outputs. So when we discovered the clock, right, all of a sudden the brain was like a clock. When we invented the computer, or discovered the computer, or however you want to put it, suddenly the brain becomes like a computer. So whatever the most advanced technology we have, suddenly everyone models the human after that. So in this case, so does behavioural economics. It comes from a guy called B.F. Skinner, who's a very crazy psychologist. You should not pay attention to him. B.F. Skinner basically came up with a theory called behaviourism, and behaviourism works like this. Don't worry about what's going inside the person. Whatever behaviour and actions they're exhibiting on the outside, that's good enough for now. And you can understand, coming from a philosophy background, how this is very scary. And this is actually how most psychology works today, with mixed effects. You know, I'm not trying to say that people don't have observable behaviours. I'm not trying to say that people don't act in ways that aren't telling, right? But we have consciousness, and this is something that Facebook doesn't give any amount of interest in whatsoever. All they want to do is make money. So a really good example of how behavioural economics would work, for instance, is an example that I took from the Free Economics podcast. If I'm taking too long, let me know. I'll move on to the third topic, which is just statistics, and I'll spend like 3 minutes on that, and then we'll try and get this done quickly. So, for instance, if you put a photo of the car from Department of Transport on your official forms asking for money, or, like say, you would obviously have it for a speeding ticket to prove that it was you, but they found that including the images of people's license plate and cars parked outside their home meant that the Department of Transport in different parts of the US could then collect money faster. It's almost like a threat, right? Like, we know where your car is. This is your car. This is your car. We know it's your car. You know it's your car. Give us the money, right? So that's an example of how behavioural economics works. What you do is you put some stimulus that you know is correlated with some behaviour, some output. So it's very bad. I wanted to say another word, but I'm not going to. So you have some input, putting image on a car on the Department of Transport communication, and that leads to you paying your bills or paying your fine faster, blah, blah, blah. Another example would be like Coles and Woolworths, right? Where you position something on the shelf at the eye level is the person that you're targeting. The music that you play, the lighting that you have, the way the store is arranged with the milk always at the back, so you have to walk all the way down the store past all the crap to get what you actually want, right? So this is behavioural economics. Behavioural economics is a very reductive view of the person. I think it's inhumane, and it's the main psychological theory that's powering this metadata collection and advertisement system on our internet. So I'll get to the last bit. So during the Enlightenment, there were a couple of philosophies that became married together, and they're still very powerful to this day. And in some ways, I think it's led to a very imperialist concept of how science is deployed in society. And this would be, say, and not to say that I don't like natural science, but natural science in some ways in our society is dominant, right? You go to university, it's always the physicists and the mathematicians that are the ones who get all the funding for the military and all this stuff. But people like me who did an arts degree are supposedly worthless and petulant little idiots, which is unfortunate because we can pick apart statistics, which is unfortunate. Yeah, so we have positivism, statistics, and utilitarian ethics. And in some ways, there's a quote from Marx where he talks about liberty, property, equality, and Bentham. And so your moral science would be utilitarianism. your method of truth proving would be positivism, and the way you get raw empirical data would be through statistics. And so this combined package of, it's quite often deployed in natural science. I'm not trying to say that this is always the way natural science is conducted, but it's a very textbook hegemonic attitude that you get taught very early on in uni, and if you practice it, you get good marks all the way through the end. I'm pretty sure that this is true. So statistics by itself is trying to take a part and reasoning about a whole with as limited information as you can possibly get. It does require collecting a lot of information, right? Another way of going about this would be deductive reasoning. This is inductive reasoning, right? Using a small amount of information to predict the future. Deductive reasoning is taking the nature or the essence of something and then proving conclusions that were already inside the premises in the beginning. And both are just as valid, but the way we conduct science today, at least, or social science, is that induction is better than deduction, because deduction comes from like the Middle Ages, is Platonistic, religious, this sort of stuff. But when you look at dialectics very carefully, statistics falls apart, because it says that by collecting small little parts, somehow you can build up a whole. This is actually not the way human thinking works, and it's not the way the universe works, is what I reckon. I know we've gone to metaphysics now, and I'll finish up very quickly. It's important to look at the whole. And this is a much better way of reasoning. Because you only have to worry about the small little clicks and little information boxes that you have on your computer in your cubicle, you only fit into one bit of the division of labour, right? When you use the computer on Facebook or for collecting metadata and this sort of stuff. If we thought outside our cubicles, if we broadened our minds, if we thought 2 or 3 steps later than we currently did, I think I could convince you to stop using Facebook and all this sort of stuff. I spent many years off it. I'm on it now for tactical reasons, obviously, and I share very little. And I know that it's surveilling me when I'm on there, but I look for a more utopian future. And I have some suggestions about what kind of utopian future we could engineer tomorrow. So thank you very much for listening.